Well, first off, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
All right, so we just started our third session of the year, but this one is the regular session. It's different from a special session. What are some of the biggest agenda items that you're expecting to see this go round?
Well, we already had, as you mentioned, two special sessions, so we got a couple of big things off the plate right there. So I think the big thing that you're going to see very soon is talk about insurance. I mean, we've been talking about that for a while. Finally, we have a legislative session where some of those things can be addressed by the legislature. And, a bunch of bills have been filed. I think there's a handful of them, broadly speaking, that kind of deal with the regulation of the insurance industry. That's kind of what we're going to see out the chute. The argument being that we don't have a lot of insurance companies in our state, not only because we're vulnerable to disasters, but also because we overregulate it to some degree compared to other states. So I think what you'll see is a variety of bills that tend to try and ease some of the regulations on insurance companies with the hope that will attract more of them into the state, increase competition, and then lower the rates.
Outside of insurance, of course, education is going to be big in any regular session that you have. The governor also mentioned our Constitution in Louisiana, which has not really been changed since 1974. What are the goals with restructuring it, and why bring this up now?
Well, there's been a lot of talk, as you hear over the years about, we need to change our Constitution. Never got very far. I think the governor is coming in on kind of a wave of support and kind of momentum and feels like this is the time to do it. I think the argument has been that our Constitution, which was approved in 1974, has kind of ballooned over the years. Everybody knows we pass or vote on constitutional amendments year after year after year. We put a lot of things in our Constitution that probably should just be in the law, not in the Constitution. We do things that kind of tie the hands of lawmakers when we get into budget situations.
Well, I want to stop you there, but can you give me an example?
Yeah, well, for instance, the property taxes. If you think about it, when we vote on amendments, many times, most of the time, we're voting on something to deal with property taxes or local taxes. We've basically put our tax code, our property tax code, in the Constitution as opposed into the state law. And so every time a local government or somebody else wants to make some change in property taxes, which are local taxes, and we have 64 parishes, you have to go to the Constitution to do that. The other thing is we dedicate a lot of dollars in the Constitution. So when you get into a budget situation, you don't have the flexibility to kind of deal with those things when the money gets really tight.
And so in addition to talking about our Constitution, there was also something he talked about whenever it came to Louisiana Supreme Court, and that is, appointing judges, how Louisiana selects them. What is Governor Landry's goal with bringing this up and talking about this now?
It's hard to say what the governor's goal is because on the one hand, we're dealing with a lawsuit similar to what we saw in the congressional districting about whether we should add another minority, seat into the Supreme Court. That's something that's come up a couple of times. It hadn't passed, but will likely come up again. Then you have this other whole thing going on where legislators are putting in these bills to actually make Supreme Court justices appointed by the governor as opposed to elected by the people or elected in different ways, or the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court selected in different ways. So there's a lot going on with the Supreme Court, which probably has to do, to some degree along partisan lines, because parties feel differently, feel like the courts are acting one way or the other, really trying to assert, I think, more of, I won't say political control, but maybe more conservative control or bent on the Supreme Court.
And it seems like there's kind of a theme to this session. In the past, you either focus on solely the budget or you focus on other things like cultural issues. But it seems like for this particular session, that's not really the goal. Instead, you're focusing more on policy whenever it comes to insurance, education, and the topics that we just talked about.
He didn't really get into any of those things dealing with some of the social issues that we've seen the last few years. But that said, those same bills have been filed again. And so I think we'll still have that same discussion that we had before, but the difference being a lot of those either didn't pass or they got vetoed by the governor because he was a Democrat and he had signaled he wasn't for those things. This time, you don't have that same obstacle, and I do feel like we're going to see a lot of those same issues come up again. I think they probably have a better chance of passing this time, and you have a governor that would probably sign those into law.
All right, so we've kind of done a fire round of questions about this regular session. We've talked about insurance, we've talked about our Constitution, Louisiana Supreme Court, the budget, and also social issues. Is there anything that you think our viewers specifically should know about?
Well, I do think there is going to be a big discussion about education, in particularly, as the governor mentioned, talking about parental choice. It's basically a program called Education Savings Accounts. We're seeing them pop up in a number of red states around the country. We've debated it a couple times here in Louisiana, but I think this time we've got the governor making it a priority. And it's sort of like a voucher program. It would allow state dollars that are now going through the MFP, the funding formula that go to public schools, really to go into an account that a parent might set up for their child, and then could use those dollars for private school or for some specialized tutoring or something like that. That's going to be a little controversial, as you might imagine. School districts are worried about it. There are questions about the cost. There's questions about accountability, but that's going to be a very big issue, and I think people will be hearing about it for sure over the next weeks ahead on that one.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We are out of time.
Well, good to see you again.
Of course.